Talk on UK Health Radio. I'm Robin Daly, host for the show and founder of the UK charity Yes to Life, that helps people with cancer understand the benefits of integrative medicine and supports them in accessing integrative approaches. If you're unfamiliar with the name integrative medicine, it's a very broad view of what elements to consider when approaching health, and will, in addition to the conventional services offered by the NHS, include a whole raft of other approaches that are supportive of mind, body and spirit, what you call a holistic approach. My guest this week is a regular on the show who is a functional medicine practitioner, a discipline that's primarily concerned with getting to the root causes of disease. I'm talking to Mark Bennett about a subject that's getting its first airing on this show, mycotoxins. I'm speaking to Mark at his home in Berkshire over the internet. Hi Mark, brilliant to have another chance to chat about functional medicine with you.
Hello Robin, yeah, well it's a real pleasure to be back, thank you.
So today we're talking about a subject that we penciled in a little while back, something that concerns you maybe more than other practitioners, mycotoxins and their effects on our health. So let's wade straight in by being clear about what we're talking about here. What are mycotoxins?
Okay, well that's a very good question. What are mycotoxins? So, before I answer that question, I'll just to expand on the comment you made. I mean, you understand, obviously, you know from our previous chats that as a functional practitioner, I'm looking at causation. I'm looking at the reasons why chronic disease, not just cancer, but any chronic condition manifests. And mycotoxins have become a very large part of my clinical practice in the last couple of years, as I became more and more aware that they can have, and I'll discuss obviously what these are in a minute, they can have a considerable impact, adverse impact on human biochemistry, and therefore could be energizing any number of conditions, and including cancers. So there is real evidence in the literature base that these things can really cause significant problems, okay, in human biology, and hence, as my approach, functional approach to helping people get control of chronic conditions, long-term health conditions, this is an elephant in the room that we need to address. And it's not saying that everybody's got issues with mycotoxins. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that often if you cannot explain why somebody's not achieving the goals they should be through diet and lifestyle changes, okay, then there will be other things going on. And this is something that I'm very much more aware of as a practitioner in the last couple of years. So going back to your opening question, what are mycotoxins? I mean, mycotoxins are essentially toxic chemicals that fungal organisms, fungi basically produce, okay? These are defense chemicals. And the reason they produce them is because these organisms are fighting amongst each other for dominance in an environment. So they release these chemicals as sort of warfare, okay, against each other. And these mycotoxins, as I said, are incredibly potent. And the science on this is also, evolving at a rapid rate. And we still don't have a complete view on, how many mycotoxins there are. But what we do have an understanding of is there are certain species of fungi that produce certain mycotoxins that in the literature are correlated with dysfunction, okay? And these are incredibly toxic substances. So, I don't want to over-egg this, but if you think about, there is evidence that, for example, the Russians, the Soviets, okay, were using effectively a mycotoxin in Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s as a weapon. So, these are, there's even evidence that these things could be used as weapons against humanity. So they're not friendly things. But we as a species have evolved alongside fungi. I mean, fungi are one of the oldest sort of kingdoms on Earth in terms of life forms, okay? You also know from previous discussions about mushrooms, for example. Mushrooms are part of the fungi kingdom. Medicinal mushrooms can be exceedingly useful, used intelligently in cancer treatment, supporting integrative oncological treatments, supporting or reducing or even sometimes eliminating side effects of chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and enhancing the impact of these treatments. So it's not that all fungi are bad, but it's these certain toxins that certain fungi produce. Now, there are the classic black mold, Stachyboitris chartarium is AKA black mold, which you see in lots of bathrooms or in, the drums of washing machines or in corners that you don't tend to clean that often, or where there's a bit of water damage in a house. That particular mold can release a particular type of mycotoxin that's very well studied. And we understand that this can create sick building syndrome. It can create all kinds of horrors in recipients. And what is interesting is that certain people are far more susceptible to these mycotoxins than others. So it doesn't mean that everybody within a particular environment is going to have a major problem, okay? It may be that certain people are going to go down a lot quicker than others, and they are like the sort of canaries in the mine, so to speak, and actually telling you there's an issue there. But these mycotoxins are, when you start to look at the World Health Organization themselves, they've published research on this. Really interesting. Food Science and Nutrition 2020, a study shows that there's 25% up to 80% of staple foods are actually contaminated with mycotoxins.
Right.
This is staggering information. It's like, okay, so what are we talking about? Cereals, nuts, spices, dried fruits, coffee beans. There's a big issue on coffee. The companies even advertise their coffee in that world as mycotoxin free, low mold coffees.
Right. Okay, that's
and I don't know whether that's something you've come across.
I haven't come across that. Very interesting there. Yeah.
It's fascinating. And then you've got, so it's the storage conditions. It's dairy, certain dairy. If you've got animals that are being fed grains that are moldy, then basically the mycotoxins will get excreted in their dairy output. Okay. So it's the storage conditions. It's how these things are stored. So if you think about the Ukraine situation and the fact that grain was stuck in these warehouses for a very long time, then they suddenly start to ship the grain that's been in warehouses, maybe in a warm climate for some time in the summer or something. You could argue that that may have extra mycotoxic load in it. So the World Health Organization themselves are really aware of this problem. It's a big problem. And there's actually a group called JECFA, which is an international body responsible for evaluating the issue with mycotoxic load in the food supply. So they're toxic chemicals, and it is a known problem, and it's even recognized by the World Health Organization themselves. So when you start to join all that information together, is it any wonder that we would be, maybe we might want to take this slightly seriously when it comes to people's health and well-being?
Fair enough. Okay, so life is bugs, basically, as we're finding out these days. They're inside us, outside us, in our environment. In fact, some people even think they are us. And
yes.
So some of these, you say, are giving off these toxic chemicals. These are in what kind of form? You gave the example of black mold. Is that a vapor that's coming off them?
It is. It's a gas. It's effectively It is a gaseous exposure. But fungal organisms will create volatile organic compounds which give the musty smell that you can sometimes. So you walk into a room and you say, "Oh, this smells very musty, damp." Those are the volatile organic compounds. Actually, mycotoxins are odorless. Okay, but if you've got a room that it has poor ventilation or has had water damage in the corner or there's a leaking roof. Look, lots of things will cause these issues. And I've actually got a list here of, just the key things that you would look for. Most houses have had water damage at some point in their life. It's very unusual. We all have leaks somewhere at some point in time, whether it's under the sink or the loo, or, there could be a bit of water ingress because a tile has come loose on the roof, or the gutters are overflowing. And as I said, washing machines, classic. Lots of people will leave their washing machine door closed once they've used the washing machine. That is a perfect environment for molds to grow, underneath the drum. And, these things can be, I've had multiple clients in the last 2 years who have had major issues with their washing machine. Now, it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? It sounds ridiculous that the humble washing machine could be harboring something that's
supposed to be getting rid of things, not
yes, them. Exactly. Look at your toothbrush. Not your toothbrush, but I'm talking about, people's toothbrushes. Toothbrushes can, once the head gets a little bit manky, that would harbor mycotoxins in their molds, which would then potentially release these mycotoxins. So I don't want people to become paranoid about molds. It's like you want to try and do as much as possible to mitigate exposure to molds. So if you do have water damage, get it sorted very quickly. If your carpet floods, don't just dry it off, and expect it to be all right. Get rid of the carpet, get it on insurance or whatever you can do and replace it. So, the thing is, you don't want water damage that's lying around. Is historic water damage. It's never resolved completely. And these issues really do, these problems within a building can absolutely change the environment of the building to something that is toxic to certain people that are in that building. And that can then lead to chronic issues, including actually energizing even cancers. So let me give you an example. I mean, zearalenone, which is a particular mycotoxin that we can measure in tests, has estrogenic properties. So you can imagine what that might do for estrogenically receptive or driven cancers, ovarian, uterine, prostate in men, those type of things.
Exactly like the plastics drive it in the same way.
And also, what one has to understand is that these mycotoxins are incredibly chemically stable. They do not get removed through food processing. You can't, if the food is contaminated, it is contaminated. Yeah, right. You won't get rid of it by drying it out. The residue is there, so you got to stop the stuff growing in the first place.
Okay, so cooking though, what does that do?
Cooking they're heat stable. They won't change anything. What you've got to do is not eat food that is being contaminated in this way. So how the grain is harvested, where it's stored, these are really important factors in terms of working out how to reduce the exposure to these things. Now, as I said a minute ago, we have developed multiple systems to be able to eliminate and control these things. It's not that we don't expect as an organism to deal with mycotoxins.
Right. I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
We can't live in a zero mycotoxin environment. That's not real. No. Okay. But certain people genetically are predisposed to under excreting these particular toxins. And this then segues into the work done by Dr. Richie Shoemaker in Australia. He actually runs a website called survivingmould.au. It's a great resource. And there is actually, I know we're probably jumping ahead here, but there's a really great test that you can do in the comfort of your own home on your computer called the Visual Contrast Sensitivity Test, which is basically an online test that checks for contrast sensitivity in the eyes. And okay, it's not, clearly it's a very blunt tool, but what he is saying is for 15 Australian dollars, you can just log on, pay your 15 Australian dollars, do the test. And if you fail that test, it gives you a left and right eye, tick box, and it shows you where you failed, and it says fail or pass. And then it asks you a number of, whether you're presenting with key symptoms that may be associated with, for example, mycotoxic exposure. And you either pass or fail the test. Now, if you fail that test, then it's sort of implying that this might be, not it is, it might be an issue for you, and therefore it's probably worth investigating a little bit deeper. And to do that, you would then look at urine tests. So you can then use, I use labs in the US, and you can do a mycotoxin urine panel, and they're looking for excretions above a standard range of these mycotoxins coming out of the body. And if you find that is elevated, then you've got a problem. So that is then when you step in and start to look at how do we resolve this. But the point here is that there's a cheap way into this without having to spend fortunes to understand if that's a problem. You look at your symptoms as well. And let me just run through. These symptoms, a lot of these symptoms, I'm going to say, could be caused by other reasons. It's not to say that you're presenting with fatigue, it's because of mycotoxins. No, yeah. But let me just, read some of these things. So you've got fatigue, brain fog, loss of motor function, muscle wasting, depression, blood pressure issues, anxiety, insomnia, night terrors, weight gain, poor appetite, food sensitivities. When I see clients with disproportionate food sensitivity is going on. I mean, literally, they are reacting to 50 foods. It's like, why? What's going on there? It doesn't make sense. Why would the body have lost tolerance to so many food products? Okay. And it's like, so weight loss, asthma, shortness of breath, I mean, chronic muscle pain, sneezing, vertigo. These are, I mean, I could go on. There's 50 of them. I won't bore you with them all. But what I'm saying, isn't it surprising how, those things, of course, can be caused by other issues. Of course they can. And I'm not saying that people who are presenting with depression are all got mycotoxic issues. But what I'm saying is if you do a sensible intervention to help with depression and you end up then not resolving the problem, there probably is a series of other things going on. And one of the elephants in the room could well be this.
Interesting.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Okay, so can we jump back to, we were talking about exposure, and it seems you've got two sort of major variables here. One is the amount of exposure, and the other one is your sensitivity. And so on the amount of exposure, first of all, as you said, we've all got built-in systems for this stuff, and so a moderate amount of exposure is neither here nor there. So that's the reason to not go berserk about worrying about these things intensely. But a kind of chronic exposure, which might come from living in a room which has got this happening all the time, for example, that's a different thing, and anybody's system could get overwhelmed by that. Is that correct?
That is correct. And, certain people, as I sort of implied, are genetically on the back foot when it comes to detoxification. The production of glutathione, for example, internally can absolutely be essential to conjugating these toxins and then removing them from the body. In terms of detoxification systems, your liver's got to be working well. You've got to have good lung capacity. You've got to have good output, digestive output. I mean, when people are constipated, this is a problem. It's a big problem. If you're not going on a regular basis, then you're not eliminating efficiently. And that is an issue. And so often you will see people with chronic constipation with these type of issues. Okay, that's not to say everybody has those issues. Yes, some people do also have loose output, but I'd much rather in this instance that people had loose output and were going regularly, in maybe even in an uncontrolled manner, because at least they're eliminating. But there is a genetic predisposition, and it comes down to how strong you are from the point of view of your biochemistry, and looking at things like gut permeability, aka leaky gut, these things. So what we know is that these mycotoxins can actually start to cause changes in the microflora. Now, we know, any chronic disease, and especially cancer. I mean, there is a statement by, I think, Dr. Zach Bush, who's an extraordinary man in the US, an oncologist himself, who said that there is no cancer that's not connected to a microfloral imbalance. Yeah. So it's like, well, that's quite a statement coming from a gentleman like him. It's like saying, okay, the balance of a microflora can be perturbed by the mycotoxic exposure, and that would then potentially cause any number of issues, possibly even cancer. It could contribute to energizing that condition. So it is something to be very aware of. And something that, again, you don't want to over egg it, but at the same time, if you go and do a test, you fail the VCS test I just mentioned, and then you do a urine test and you find and I will often see, 5 or 6 mycotoxins that they're measuring, which are the ones that we know through the literature cause the greatest harm. And then what we find is they are literally swimming in these things, Their bodies are literally overflowing with these things. You've got to start thinking about ways to get rid of it. And the first thing you said about exposure, you've got to avoidance. And somebody, I mean, if you're living in a house with overt mold on the walls and you've got a chronic condition, you can't just clean it up. You can't just go, oh, I'm going to paint it over, or I'm going to just, mop it down. I mean, mopping it down would also create loads of issues potentially by, disturbing these mycotoxins and actually increasing the amount that you might inhale. But at the end of the day, you've got to get out. And I know that sounds dramatic, but if your house is moldy, you've got to resolve it. And you can get people to come in and actually resolve the mold issue. So I've actually found a company that will do this in a non-toxic way. So, and certain clients of mine have brought them in and used this company, and they spray a non-toxic substance, which is called peracetic acid, which basically breaks down into oxygen, water, and vinegar. But it's a dry fog, and they will dry fog the whole house. They do a test before they do anything. So they measure the mycotoxins in the environment. And then what they do is they dry fog the whole house. And it takes a day, literally from morning to evening, they will do this whole process. And then they use a second treatment, which is like, again, it's essentially carbon and nitrogen, a molecule made out of carbon and nitrogen that coats all the surfaces, is non-toxic, and it creates like little spikes. And a minuscule little, you can't feel these things, you can't know it's there, but it's like what it does is it stops any mold spores from landing on the surface and taking hold. So it's a really clever system, and the feedback I've had so far with this particular approach has been really, really good.
Well, that is a very interesting resource. Are you happy to share the name of the company?
I am indeed, and the name of the company is Pure Maintenance.
Pure Maintenance, okay.
I'm online. I mean, they're a great outfit, and the problem is a lot of companies are using toxic chemicals to basically do mold remediation, and that's actually, I would argue, you're just coming from the frying pan into the fire. That's really
doesn't make sense. Okay, so keeping on the exposure line here, then, so we've established that a moderate amount of exposure with a healthy person who hasn't got a particular genetic weakness is neither here nor there. For somebody who's sick, who may not have a genetic weakness, but their immune system is depleted because they're sick. Now, I assume that they are people who should be much more concerned about this.
Much more concerned. And look, you've mentioned the key point here, which is what are the key things that excessive mycotoxic load does to the body? It suppresses immune function. That's one of the key things it will do. Yeah. So these mycotoxins will literally bash your immune system down, and that is a problem from any perspective for any reason. I mean, especially, we know with regard to cancer that you need your immune system functioning as well as it can do. So it's like, is that also a reason why that contributes to the manifestation of certain cancers in the body? But it means people get constant infections. It means people, there's lots of issues. I mean, thyroid dysfunction is another classic one. Thyroid suppression by mycotoxic load, yes. So there is a correlation, as I said, between the body's ability to actually efficiently make glutathione, which can be compromised on a certain genetic basis. There are also these HLA genes, which are often correlated with things like gluten-related disorders, celiac disease, rheumatoid arthritis, those type of things, ankylosing spondylitis, those type of issues. So there are certain genetic predispositions that will mean you have a greater chance of developing excessive mycotoxic load in the body. And this is because the body is unable to efficiently eliminate these things. You actually recycle the mycotoxins. It's like you might actually bundle it up and try and get rid of it. But then what happens is the body doesn't eliminate it properly, and you recycle it. It's like a hepatic recirculation of toxins going on. And the sort of the kicker on this, Robin, is the fact that you may not have a current exposure in your environment. You may have had this exposure years ago, and in another environment. So many times you would take a life history. I take a life history of my clients, and they go, "Oh, when I was in university in Edinburgh, let's say, I lived in a moldy flat." And when you think about what happens then health-wise, it was ever since I lived in that moldy flat that my health took a complete downturn. And it's like that eureka moment of knowing that was a pivotal moment. You hadn't thought about it because no one had actually raised it to your attention. But actually, that was the moment of within a few months of living and moving into that flat. Oh, my menstrual cycle changed, or I started to get chronically fatigued, or I started to have brain fog, or whatever it was. But then once you leave that environment, unless you actually physically remove those things from the body and help the body to detoxify them, they just get shunted around within the body, recycled.
Blimey. So the kind of a parallel thing that's much more commonly talked about in sort of nutrition circles, at least, would be heavy metals. Your heavy metal exposure could have been when you were 16,
Absolutely.
but that doesn't mean it's gone anywhere.
No.
Interesting. I've not heard these talked about in the same way. So, yeah, serious situation.
It's potentially very serious because it's sort of below the radar, and you just wouldn't think. It's very difficult to get to the bottom of because there's no real reason to even think about them, especially if you're not living in an environment where you think there is any issues going on.
I see that. Okay, so that's a new kind of flag to be aware of. Still banging on about the exposure. The worst case scenario is you're sick and you've got a genetic predisposition that means you can't do anything much with toxins anyway. Those people are must be an absolute essential that they make sure they're not exposing themselves.
Totally. Although through clinical experience, I have actually seen a scenario whereby an individual, very high levels of mycotoxin in living in an environment where they're actually building a new environment to move into. So, it's going to be a lovely, clean, beautiful, mycotoxin free, clean new house. Okay. But he's still living in this moldy environment. But actually, when we retested 6 months later, the mycotoxic load, it had fallen dramatically on the back of the interventions that he'd already done.
Right.
He was still presenting with too much of these mycotoxins, but the numbers had fallen significantly compared to where they were. So the approach, the binders, the treatments that he's using, the natural treatments that he was implementing are making a difference, but he's still in trouble. Until he moves out of that environment, you're not going to get total resolution.
No, that's fairly obvious, but it's very heartening to hear, obviously, that this is something you can do something about, just like heavy metal exposure. You can actually do something about it once you're aware of the issue. And but you've got to actually come up with the realization first. So maybe can we talk a bit about this? You told us what you can do in our house, get the company in, get it treated. What about us?
Right. From our perspective, this is, again, it's like everything to do with functional approach to health. It's multifactorial. There's no single thing like juicing broccoli is going to magically resolve, this issue.
Right.
It is always multifactorial. And there are lots of things that I would implore or advise a client to consider doing. So diet is a really big part of this. So one has to think about the foodstuffs that typically are contaminated. So going right back to the beginning of this conversation, one has to think very, very long and hard about grain consumption, nuts, seeds, spices, all these things. Now, I'm not saying don't eat these things. What I'm saying is you've got to understand, are they stored in an appropriate way? People put nuts and seeds in the fridge for months. They may not even put them in the fridge. They're sitting in a cupboard and the temperature is just inappropriate and it's just a breeding ground for issues. So thinking about freshness of food, getting fresh food products into the body, but then certain plant-based materials are very good at binding these things or stimulating bile flow, for example.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
So certain plants will stimulate bile flow, eating fresh meats, making sure that you're eating offal if you can do it. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but basically making sure that the foods you're eating are fresh and are stored properly. So that's a big
Can we just be clear about two things you mentioned there? One is about, you talk about things binding. What are you describing there exactly, and why is that important? And the other one is bile flow. Why is bile flow important?
Bile flow is important because it will literally bind toxins, coming out of the liver and eliminate it, eliminate it from the body. So the liver is ducted into the top of the small intestine, okay? So that is where you start to eliminate. The whole digestive process ultimately is about elimination of unwanted substances, toxic substances. So if you're not eliminating properly, i.e. you're not eliminating regularly, clearly the toxic load is going to build up, okay? And there's a greater chance that these things can then be recycled. I mean, just going back to binders, if you're using binders, which we haven't talked about, things like charcoal and clay, which you would use depending on the type of mycotoxin that you find out in a test. So look, charcoal will work on certain mycotoxins, but not on others, okay? So you might use a binder. You think, oh, it's just easy. I just bind these up. I just take a whole lot of clay and charcoal, and basically I just bind the mycotoxins. But if you're not going to the loo regularly, if you are not going every day, at least once a day, that is actually potentially going to make it even worse. Yeah. So you're going to bind everything up, you're herding everything up, and then you're getting to this sort of point where you can't eliminate. And then what's going to happen is there's going to be reabsorption. So yes, food is a really big part of this, and it comes back down to very sensible, clean, unprocessed foods, trying to keep grain consumption under control, making sure that you're storing your foods in a very appropriate way. Nuts and seeds should be in a fridge. You shouldn't leave them. Grain should be kept in a fridge. Rice should be kept in the fridge. You don't want to be keeping it in some sort of, warm cupboard, dark cupboard somewhere where these things will, mycotoxins will flourish. Fungal organisms will flourish. And then other things you can do, dry brushing for lymphatic drainage. You can go and look online for dry brushing techniques, just to move lymph around the body. Lymph is a unsung hero of detoxification in the body. Exercise, infrared saunas, getting hot, using near infrared saunas and getting the body up to a sweating point. Sweating is a fantastic thing to do, hence exercise. Exercise is a great thing to do in terms of elimination. Breathing properly, it's like breath work. Most of us, we've all got to breathe, otherwise we don't live. But for something that we do and we have to do each and every moment of every day, most of us don't breathe properly. So it's like, read the book Breath. It's an extraordinary book by James Nestor. It's the most extraordinary journey on how to breathe properly. So these things, then you start to add in also the binders that I just sort of briefly touched on. Things like charcoal, clay, bentonite clay. Certain probiotics are also really useful, okay, for binding, but it depends on the mycotoxin. And this is why one has to have the information on which mycotoxin is presenting you, or mycotoxins, plural, are presenting you the problem. And once you know, then you say, okay, right, these are susceptible to being bound by charcoal. These are susceptible to a probiotic. And then you can go in with that. Make sure digestive system is working well. Make sure your inputs are going, in terms of food inputs, are sensible based on what I've just said. And categorically reduce exposure through an environment. You've got to get the environment sorted. So if you can't move house, get professionals in, sort out the damp, get a treatment done, reduce the mycotoxic load, and then you're in a much better place. Because obviously you're pulling multiple levers and you're reducing load, you're increasing excretion. So in theory, you can get on top of this.
Interesting. It's something that I can see for myself. I need to get my head around from the point of view is like we normally think of these things as the actual mould itself. And so, you're thinking in terms of something that's visual or whatever, you can see it quite easily. But you're saying, no, it's not that. It's actually the chemicals these moulds are given off, which you can't see, you can't even smell it. And those are the things that are kicking around. And you're likely for them to be there without you realizing it at all, just because of the conditions you've created.
Well, this is exactly the point. And yes, musty. If you've got a musty smell going on, there is definitely trouble because there's other volatile organic compounds coming off. Okay, but it is insidious. It's like it's below the radar, and also what can happen, and one has to be very aware of this. If you are living in a moldy environment and you move to a clean environment, be really careful about what you take with you and how you take it.
Right.
So clothes will literally be riddled with it. Okay, so it's like you've got to wash them in a particular way, wash those clothes in a particular way to make sure. I mean, vinegar has potent antifungal properties. Okay, so there are certain tricks of the trade that you can use in order to wash your clothes at a particular heat with a particular sort of these natural agents put in. I mean, essential oils are really good. Burning candles that have natural essential oils in, or using a waterless diffuser, with essential oils in, is to actually fill your environment up with essential oils that can absolutely be kryptonite to fungal organisms. These are really sensible, simple, cheap things that you can do. You don't have to go crazy with this stuff. It's just making sensible decisions about what one does, but working with a practitioner who knows what they're talking about. Understanding that this is something that might be a problem, and then what do you do about it? So it is a bit of a, well, it is a warfare essentially with the microorganisms. I mean, the issue isn't actually the molds, it's what they produce.
I see that.
It's their output. That's the problem.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, we think of it as being the mold that's the problem, primarily. That's what I'm saying, is it's a bit of a shift of attention. Interesting. So can we talk a bit about lifestyle and these mycotoxins? Now, okay, the most sensible lifestyle approach, you just avoid having that stuff around your house, mold or whatever it is. That's number one. But the other things you can do, you just mentioned a few things, which are kind of things that you might do in any house, whether you think you've got them or not, just as to keep healthy and to make sure it doesn't happen. So do you want to speak about that a bit?
Okay, I mean, there's some really simple things to do. I mean, modern houses don't have enough airflow in them. We need airflow. Open the windows. Okay, when it's cold outside and everybody's, turning down their heating because of a cost of living crisis and energy issues, I appreciate that's not necessarily what everybody wants to do. But sleeping with a window open in your bedroom, I mean, I talk for ourselves. We have the bedroom closed off with a door from the rest of the house, so we're not sucking heat in, but the bedroom, we leave the window open. Even if it's -5 outside, we still have the window open because I want airflow in the room. So actually having airflow, proper airflow, and modern houses are incredibly sterile from that perspective. So actually having movement of air is really important. Humidity below 50%, you will not have molds growing. Okay, so if you think about keeping humidity, now that can be expensive because obviously you've got to put dehumidifiers in rooms and you've got to basically get rid of loads of water in the environment. And at certain times of the year, humidity levels go very high. I mean, in the winter in the UK, I mean, the average humidity in London could be 80-90%. So it's like nothing dries. So it's damp. And it's really interesting, I'm not talking about cancer patients here. I'm talking about other people I've worked with things like, chronic eczema, chronic eczema, asthma, fatigue, those sort of issues. Okay. In the summer, they get a lot better. Okay. Which is really interesting. Even if they got hay fever, they still feel more energized. Their skin problems will actually diminish. They may still have a bit of hay fever going on. And one client actually went off to Nevada, which is probably one of the driest places on planet Earth. Yeah. And the message I got back was extraordinary. It was, everything's better. Everything. My skin, my energy levels, my brain fog's gone, everything. And you know why? Because, she was in an environment that basically
they didn't stand a chance. All right.
Wasn't a chance of these things being there.
Right.
So, and then within 48 hours of landing back in the UK, it all starts to go a little bit wrong. So it's very, very interesting how the environment, the just humidity level in your environment. So, if you're spending a lot of time in certain rooms, then use a dehumidifier. Try and get the humidity levels down, and airflow, and using, as I said, things like certain essential oils with dry diffusers, not the ones that pump out the water, the mist. You don't want to be putting humidity back into the environment. No. Clearly, you want to be doing it with a dry diffuser. You can buy them on Amazon. They're not expensive things, and you can buy the oils. You can burn candles. So those are really simple tricks. And if you do find problems with molds in the house, if you do clean them up, make sure you're wearing an N95 mask, make sure you're wearing gloves, make sure you're wearing old clothes. And the minute you finish cleaning any area, you need to wash your clothes thoroughly. You just don't want to be just sort of assuming you can just, go along in your normal attire and just clean these things up without any sort of consideration about the disturbance of these mycotoxins.
Right.
And you can also test. There are certain labs that will test the dust in your house for the presence of mycotoxins. So you can do this stuff relatively cost effectively by, for example, taking a sample out of your vacuum cleaner.
Right.
Sending it off to the lab. And, if you vacuum clean, you're vacuuming all around the house on top of shelves and stuff.
Good, yeah.
It's going to pick this stuff up.
Yeah. So just want to compare and contrast. It seems to me that we've gone from one set of issues to another one. Anybody of my age grew up in a house that was cold, damp, and lots of drafts everywhere. So there's plenty of movement of air, but there's condensation all over the windows all winter. Absolutely damp inside, and quite likely to be mould here, there, everywhere. So given what you said about the stuff hanging on for a long time, that's an issue potentially for anyone of a certain age who didn't have so much money they could afford the heating in those days.
Totally correct. But there again, what I would say is if you haven't got any chronic health issues, then don't worry about it.
Right. Okay, that's fair enough.
If you've got chronic issues going on and whatever you do doesn't resolve those issues, then what I'm trying to say is think outside the box, and mycotoxins might be a variable to consider in that equation.
Okay. But then, fast forward to today and you have houses which to me seem to be hot and damp. They're like, greenhouses really. There's kind of, I would think that for these fungi and things, they're marvellous. They must love it in some ways because there's not much airflow, as you say. And if you've got a bit of steam going around for the cooking and the bath and what have you, the shower, and you cook it all up, then it must be a perfect environment.
Totally. So, fling the windows open, get some air into the house. Clearly that's obviously easier to do in the summer.
Right.
Especially if you're looking, at heating bills and trying not to, get too cold.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, maybe, your bedroom is a place where you need ventilation. If you're spending a lot of time in a particular room, think about what you do in that room. Get a dehumidifier for that room, or, use a diffuser for that room. So, or open the window, or do all of it, to be honest.
All right. Well, that's all really helpful advice. I want to try out my number one weapon against such things. Hydrogen peroxide is the thing that I would go to straight away. Does it work?
Yeah, well, hydrogen peroxide would make a lot of sense because, the body's immune system obviously dumps hydrogen peroxide in front of any pathogen that is affecting the body. So, hydrogen peroxide is a fantastic catch-all, isn't it, from all kinds of angles.
Yeah, I love it. Because it's non-toxic as well.
Absolutely. So it's there are lots of ways to use it, as you know. Nebulizing diluted food-grade hydrogen peroxide can be extraordinary from a point of view of respiratory tract issues as well.
Okay, well, that's good. So that passed the test. That's great. All right. So we're just about coming to the end. So kind of to sum up, I started out by suggesting that you're maybe more concerned about the part that mycotoxins play in health than many other practitioners. In your experience, thinking about the number of people affected and the amount it affects them, how important would you say that paying attention to this area is to people with cancer?
I would say with cancer, my view, my humble opinion on working with people who want an integrated approach to dealing with this type of condition, I would say that one has to take it pretty seriously because you need to look at every single possibility as to why that condition happened in the first place. And it's the multifactorial approach, isn't it? It's about pulling all the levers, the marginal gain stuff, which I know I've written about in the past, doing as many things as you can justify doing in order to tip the balance in your favor. And so it's not, clearly it's not always going to be present in anybody who's got any chronic condition, but by taking a detailed life history, by asking the right questions, by maybe running the online VCS test, which is 15 Australian dollars, you might start to see scenarios where this needs to be investigated more. And what I often will put in a client report is, if we're not getting the results that you deserve on the back of doing the dietary changes, the lifestyle changes, not talking about mycotoxins at all. If not, then we might need to consider looking at this in order to increase the chances of you achieving your health goals. That's how I see it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very helpful. We're going to wrap it up there, Mark. Thanks very much indeed. What a fascinating topic, and one I realise I know very little about. I know a bit more now. Have you got some sort of go-to man in the street book to get on this subject, which would make them better informed?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great book written by Dr. Jill Christa, Crista, she's a naturopathic doctor, and it's called Break the Mould, but the mold spelled in US
MOLD. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, and thanks for a great interview, Mark.
Real pleasure, Robin, and I'm glad to have been of some use.
Cheers, Ed.
Nice to see you, Robin.
Yeah, and you. Bye.
All the best.
What an interesting topic. I hope you got as much from that chat as I did. I want to tell you a bit about the Yes to Life events that are coming up this year. We have two important conferences in particular that I want to mention. These both come under the same banner of You and Your Cancer Team. The first is online on the 17th of June and the second is in person on the 7th of October and will be held at the same lovely venue as last year's annual conference, Finding a Deeper Connection, at the Friends House in Euston, London. We'll be looking to make the most of both platforms, online and in person, in their respective ways, so the two events will have distinct differences. You can book for both at once at a bargain price, and, as usual, the cost of attending is as low as we can make it to make them as accessible as possible. Also, as usual, we're bringing together a stunning lineup of top speakers and workshop leaders. I'll mention some of them. Helping me develop the programs is the amazing Kirsten Chick, well known to you for her work in nutrition and her marvellous book Nutrition Brought to Life. And then there's Sophie True, also well known for her epic arrival on the integrative medicine scene via her True Fields holistic cancer events. There's health coach Isabel Galliano, exercise specialist Scarlett Roberts, medical director of Penny Brown UK Dr. Catherine Zollman, holistic chef Hayley North, founder of Cancer Options and the Peat Institute Patricia Peat, Dr. Britt Cordy, wheatgrass advocate, Dr. Sam Watts, Ayurvedic practitioner and lifestyle consultant, Aga Kahinda, cancer coach, Catalina de Ana Portela, mycologist, or in plain English, mushroom expert, and Ajit Madan, developer of specialist teas for those with cancer. That's the list so far, but there will be more. The subtitle for the online conference is Building Your Integrative Team, a practical introduction to the resources available to those diagnosed with cancer, while the in-person event focuses on working with your integrative team, meet the experts and join our incredible lineup of workshops. So basically, there'll be an immense amount on offer at a very low cost, and in addition to all of that, there will be a wide range of stands at the October event where you can meet various representatives and find out about their offerings. There's a dedicated website for the two events, yestolifeannualconference.org, which you can also access via our main website, yestolife.org.uk. Just look in the events menu. So get both those dates in your calendar, that's the 17th of June and the 7th of October, and take advantage of the early booking prices while you can. Thanks so much for listening today. I'll be back again next week with another expert guest and another Yes to Life show here on UK Health Radio. Goodbye.